Hi everyone, this is Cecil again from YellowstonePodcasts.com. Our last few podcasts have dealt with various questions that we've been asked over the years, and today is another one. Yellowstone is a huge park and people want to know, well, just how much time should I spend in the Yellowstone area? And that is what I'm going to be addressing today. Now, as is so often the case, there are two ways you can see or listen to this podcast. One is you can just listen to it and find us at any of the regular podcast sites. The other way is I do have a map up, which is, I believe, really useful. You can either go to one of our sites, westyellowstonelodge.com/map. That's westyellowstonelodge.com/map. And have a look at the map of the park so you can see just what it is that I'm talking about. Or if you go to YellowstonePodcasts.com, you can click on a link which will take you to YouTube, and you can listen to me on a YouTube video which just shows me navigating around the map. So, assuming everybody is ready and you've got the map up in front of you, let's take a look at it. You'll notice that the roads through Yellowstone make up a gigantic figure of 8. And companies like ours, which run tours in Yellowstone, divide the park into two loops, the upper loop of the park and the lower loop of Yellowstone. And by the way, if you are looking for a Yellowstone tour, you can find us at yellowstonetours.net. That's yellowstonetours.net, but more of that later. So we see that there's a smaller circle on the top and a larger circle on the bottom. Just how much time do you need to take everything in? Well, the unfortunate answer is if you want to see everything that Yellowstone has to offer, consider spending weeks here. And when I say here, I mean in West Yellowstone, Montana, because that's where one of our offices is, but I'm referring to Yellowstone National Park generally. There is so much to see and do. As so many of you probably know, Yellowstone has the incredible beauty that so many of the country's national parks has to offer, but it also has two other features. It has an assortment, a selection of wildlife that you're not going to find in many other of the American parks, and what really sets Yellowstone apart is the thermal features. Now, when I say thermal features, I'm talking about geysers, hot springs, mud pots, and fumaroles. And I'm sure that you guys have heard of the first two, and I do go through what the other two, the mud pots and the fumaroles, are in another one of our Yellowstone podcasts, which you can access at yellowstonepodcasts.com or in our YouTube channel. So the first question is, where are you going to stay? There are 5 entrances to Yellowstone, and for those of you who've got the map up or you're looking at the map, you can see that I am zooming in on the west entrance, which is the busiest entrance to Yellowstone. Then right up at the top we have the north entrance. To the right of that, to the east, there's the northeast entrance where Cook City and Silvergate are. Coming down to the south and then also off to the east, there's a road that runs from the east entrance to Cody, Wyoming, which is about 52 miles away, and then coming all the way down to the south, we come to West Thumb, and from there the road leads to the south entrance over the Rockefeller Parkway and into Grand Teton National Park. So, depending on which entrance you arrive at, and most people visit Yellowstone through our entrance, through the West Yellowstone Gate. It is far and away the busiest out of all 5 entrances. Depending on which way you are coming into Yellowstone, that may also affect just how long you want to spend here. So for argument's sake, I'm going to say, let's start in West Yellowstone, and we want to do the lower loop of Yellowstone. And for those of you who do have the map in front of you or who are watching this on YouTube, I'm zooming into the lower loop of the park. And you will notice that you can see the distances. For example, just to the right and below the Midway Geyser Basin, you'll see it's 16 miles in between Madison Junction and Old Faithful. If you come to the west entrance, you'll see it's 14 miles between the west entrance and Madison Junction. So you can see all the miles. And the problem, though, is that you can't really use the miles as a good indicator of how long it's going to take. Number one, the speed limit through much of the park is 45 miles an hour. I normally say take the distance that you're traveling, add 50%, and if you don't stop, that's how long it will take you. So 14 miles between the west entrance and Madison Junction, add 50%, that's 7 miles, bank on 20 to 21 minutes. The problem is Yellowstone is such an amazing place. You're going to see stuff that you want to stop and admire and look at and take pictures of all the time. So once again, how long should I allow? Well, if you were on one of our Yellowstone tours, and you can see that again at yellowstonetours.net, we operate tours from all around the western United States. And when we get people up to Yellowstone, we generally allow 1 day on the lower loop of the park and 1 day on the upper loop of the park. Now, that is enough to get a taste of what Yellowstone has to offer. You're not going to be able to see the entire park in depth in just 1 day on each loop. So let's take a look at the lower loop again. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see that I've zoomed in on the lower loop. And for those of you who are doing it yourselves, let's start at Yellowstone's west entrance, which is to the left or the west of the lower loop of the park. We'll come into the park. That stretch of road does not have any thermal features which are close to the road. But once you get to Madison Junction, the road between Madison Junction and Old Faithful has so much to offer in the way of thermal features. Once again, thermal features are geysers, hot springs, mud pots, and fumaroles. So the stretch of road between Madison Junction and Old Faithful is 16 miles. So once again, if you use my formula, it would take you 23, perhaps 24 minutes to drive it if you weren't stopping. But once again, there is so much to see and do. We'll notice that there's a little detour to Firehole Falls, which is along Firehole Canyon Drive. Many people like to do that. Then you go past Fountain Flat, where you can so often in the spring see bears, and I'll deal more about bears in other of these Yellowstone podcasts. We then come to our first major geyser basin, the Lower Geyser Basin. The Park Service has put in a really great boardwalk system. And by the way, when you're in Yellowstone, when you're in any of the thermal areas, you want to stay on the boardwalks. It's really dangerous to get off the boardwalks. And I'll go into that in another one of our Yellowstone podcasts. So you'll explore the Lower Geyser Basin, and just past the Lower Geyser Basin, on the right-hand side of the road, or the east side of the road, there's Firehole Lake Drive. Now, Firehole Lake Drive does not open for the season the same time many of the other roads do. So if you get here really early, you're going to miss that. But that has some great features in it as well. Those of you who are looking at the map will see that it's got Great Fountain Geyser, which is a wonderful example of a fountain geyser. And when I say fountain geyser, there's broadly speaking 2 different sorts of geysers: cone geysers and fountain geysers. Now, Great Fountain Geyser's eruption time is predicted. You have to wait quite a while for it, but then just maybe 100 yards away is another geyser, a cone geyser, white dome geyser. Now, in the old days, this used to erupt every 15 to 20 minutes. Nowadays, it probably erupts, and I'm guessing every hour to hour and 15 minutes. So, here's the question. How long do you want to wait to try and see a geyser erupt? You're going to see Old Faithful erupt. Everybody is going to see Old Faithful erupt while they're here. But how long do you want to wait to see, for example, in this case, White Dome Geyser erupting? And then there's so much else that you can do on that road. So if you did wait for Great Fountain to erupt and you did want to watch White Dome erupt as well, and then take in everything that else there is to see in Firehole Lake Drive, well, you could potentially spend half a day there. So this gives you an idea of the depth which you could do the lower loop in. We then come to the Midway Geyser Basin. Midway Geyser Basin is home to one of Yellowstone's most iconic spots, which is Grand Prismatic Spring. You'll want to take in Grand Prismatic and Excelsior Geyser Crater, which I don't believe that you see on the map. The third of the major geyser basins is the Upper Geyser Basin. The Upper Geyser Basin is where Old Faithful is, but there is so much more to the area. And then in between the two, you notice Biscuit Basin and Black Sand Basin, which are also well worth a visit as well. So many people, when they come to Yellowstone and they go to the Upper Geyser Basin, only see Old Faithful erupt. But so many of the world's, not just Yellowstone, so many of the world's thermal features are located in the Upper Geyser Basin. There's over 150 geysers in that area alone. So if you really wanted to spend some time watching Old Faithful erupt and then the other geysers erupt, you would want to spend quite a bit of time at the Upper Geyser Basin. So let's say that you wanted to watch Grand Geyser erupt, and if you do want to see Grand Geyser erupt before you get here, go to our YouTube channel, and you can find our YouTube channel by searching in YouTube for Yellowstone Tour, and that's Yellowstone Tour altogether. Don't put a space in it. And YouTube will ask you, well, didn't you mean Yellowstone Space Tour? And say, no, you just want Yellowstone Tour. That'll bring up our channel. And once you're in our channel, we've got several Grand Geyser eruptions. The reason I mention Grand Geyser is it is just such a spectacular geyser. Not only is it a spectacular geyser, but you've got two other geysers right next to it, Turbine Geyser and Vent Geyser. And they all three go off together. And then Grand Geyser will give an eruption. It will give an encore eruption and perhaps a second encore eruption. And it's just such a magnificent sight. But the problem is, if you want to see Grand Geyser erupt, you may have to wait for 4 hours. What I mean by that is there'll be a predicted eruption time, but there'll be a window on either side. So depending on various factors, the time that you may have to wait could be 1 to 2 hours on either side. So let's say that it's 2 hours either side and it only erupts right at the very end. Well, then you've had to wait 4 hours. 4 hours, golly, is going to be perhaps a third of your day if you like having a long day. There are 5 major, what I like to call major geysers in the Upper Geyser Basin area. And for those of you who are on the map, if you go all the way to the very top, you'll see that the Park Service, and this map comes from the Park Service, has very kindly put in close-ups of the various areas in Yellowstone, the various main areas, and you'll see there's one for Old Faithful. There's just, as I say, so much to see and do there. There's 5 major geysers, and if you look at that map, you'll see that there's Old Faithful, there's Castle Geyser, there's Grand Geyser, and then there's 2 others which are just to the north of it, Riverside and Daisy. Now those are 5 of the geysers in Yellowstone which regularly have their eruption times predicted. There's a 6th one. You'll recall I mentioned Great Fountain Geyser. That's the only one outside the Upper Geyser Basin which has its eruption time predicted as well. So if you want to see all 5 of those geysers erupt, well, I think you'll understand that you're going to be spending a lot of time in the Upper Geyser Basin alone. So let's continue our little trail around the park, and I'm not going to do the rest of the lower loop in as much detail as I've done the geyser area, because the area that I've just gone through is where you're going to see most of your thermal features, most of the thermal features which are close to the road. So you continue driving from the Old Faithful area to West Thumb. I never like to say that there's not a lot to see and do on any stretch of road in the park, but there really isn't an awful lot in the way of major features on that stretch of road. You've got Kepler Cascade. If you're into hiking, you've got the Lone Star Geyser hike just next to it. You'll go over Craig Pass. Isa Lake is at the top of Craig Pass. You'll want to stop at the Continental Divide. That road crosses it twice, and get some pictures. But then you get to West Thumb, which is home, in my opinion, to one of the most beautiful geyser basins in all of Yellowstone. You'll want to spend some time there. You'll continue around Yellowstone Lake. Once again, you're not going to see a lot of thermal features on that stretch of the road, but it's really beautiful, and there's several great picnic areas. You'll get to Fishing Bridge, having gone past the Lake Hotel, and there you have a choice of taking the road to the east entrance. Now, once again, you're not going to see a lot of thermal features on that road. You do have a chance of seeing grizzly bears there if you're lucky. And that stretch of road is so beautiful. And much like the road to the northeast entrance, the closer you get to the east entrance, the more beautiful it gets, with towering mountains in the background and these beautiful lakes and forests. And it's just stunning. And then just outside the park, if you do venture outside the park, the area I'm showing just to the right or the east of the east entrance, is some great grizzly bear terrain as well. So you may or may not want to do that depending on how much time you have, but you can easily spend 3 or 4 hours on that stretch of road as well. So let's get back to Fishing Bridge. We continue north, and we'll come across the second of the two major thermal feature areas on the east side of the park. The first was West Thumb. The second is the Mud Volcano and Sulphur Cauldron area. Those two have never particularly wowed me, but if you have time, they are worth seeing, particularly the lower section of Mud Volcano. We then get into the Hayden Valley, and you can easily spend a lot of time in the Hayden Valley. Now, if you look at the map, which I'm zooming in on, you can see that most of the Hayden Valley is to the left or west of the road. You don't really, though, from the road, because of the hills and the topography, get to see much of that area to the left, and the entire Hayden Valley is approximately 7 miles wide by 7 miles long, so 7 miles east to west, 7 miles south to north. But the area to the right or east, where you see the Yellowstone River, this is one of the best places in Yellowstone to see wildlife. Not just the east section to the east, but that, as I've mentioned before, is the area which has greater visibility. So if you are into seeing wildlife, you may want to spend quite some time there. Traveling to the north, we then come to a really unexpected surprise, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Now, once again, if you go to our site, virtualyellowstonetours.com, virtualyellowstonetours.com, we have several videos in there. Just click on the video, it'll take you back to YouTube, or you can just go straight to YouTube. Once again, search for Yellowstone Tour. Don't put a space in between. Tell YouTube that you actually want to see the results for Yellowstone Tour. That'll bring it up, and then you can see the videos that we've made of Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. If you're into hiking, there's two stunning hikes here, the South Rim Trail and the North Rim Trail. And even if you're not into hiking, you can drive along the South Rim Drive to Artist Point, which in my opinion has the best views of Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And you can also do the North Rim Drive, take a walk down to the brink of the upper falls, take a walk down to the brink of the lower falls. Where I'm going with this, depending on just what your needs are and what you want to see and do, that's easily another day if you want to spend that much time in that area and really take it in and do some hikes. Now, you can see that Canyon Village on the map on the right-hand side or the east side, about middle of the way down, is where the upper and the lower loop meets, and there's a road running there from east to west to Norris Geyser Basin. Something interesting which I haven't touched on before, which I'll mention now because we're at Norris. If you look carefully at the map around the lower loop, you can see there's a purple line running around more or less the lower loop, and that is the boundary of what's called the caldera. And the caldera, very, very briefly, was created, I don't know, 615 to 625,000 years ago, when there was a gigantic explosion a gigantic volcanic eruption in the Yellowstone area, and we talk more about that in others of our Yellowstone podcasts. So we notice that almost all of Yellowstone's thermal features fall within the caldera boundary area. We'll notice that Norris is just outside, so it's not a hard and fast rule for reasons that I won't go into. Not only is Norris just outside, it's also the most thermally active part of Yellowstone. Now, on our tours, which I mentioned before, which you can see once again at yellowstonetours.net, we generally do Norris on the upper loop tour. That's because we've just done so much on the lower loop tour and people are starting to get tired. And if we were staying in West Yellowstone, we would retrace our steps. You go past Gibbon Falls, you go past Artist Paint Pot, you go past Beryl Springs, all of which are worth stopping at, or you can do on the following day, because trust me, you're kind of going to be Yellowstoned out by this time of the day. So you judge for yourselves. How much time do you want to spend on the lower loop? You could do it in a day. Maybe 2 days would be a better choice. Let's now get on to the upper loop. And for the purposes of doing the upper loop, let's just say that we're going to be staying at Gardner. And you'll notice the small town of Gardner is just to the north of the north entrance to Yellowstone. I do have another podcast in which I talk about where you should stay in the park, whether you want to spend all your time in the one city or whether you're going to move around, and take a look at that and make a decision from there. And excuse me while I just have a quick gulp of water. Excuse me for that noise. So let's say that we're staying at the north entrance of Yellowstone. We want to do the upper loop of Yellowstone National Park. As you come into the park, and I'll go into this in more detail in our podcast dedicated solely to the upper loop, but you'll find there's quite a lot to see and do in the area between Gardner, the north entrance, and Mammoth Hot Springs, which is the first area in the park where the roads split up, including the Boiling River, including the possibility of looking at bighorn sheep. But you'll come into the park, we'll go to the close-ups again, and we can see at Mammoth Hot Springs, if you look at the close-up, there's a number of ways that the road can go. We came in, and I'm tracing for people who are watching the video of this, we came in on the north entrance road, and we can then, once we're in the park, either head off down to the left, or we could continue more or less straight down. If we continued straight down, we would go to Tower Roosevelt in the northeast entrance. If we were to go to the left, we would head more or less to the southwest and eventually land up at Norris Geyser Basin, which you recall I have mentioned to you. Now, Mammoth Hot Springs in and of itself is a wonderful place to visit. There's so much to see and do there. Number one, the historical value of visiting Mammoth. It's where the historic Fort Yellowstone is. You can see the old parade ground when the Army was there, and I talked about that in another one of our Yellowstone podcasts. It's also home to the terraces. You have the upper terrace and the lower terrace, and those of you who were paying attention, if you'll excuse me, when I was talking about the caldera being around the lower loop, may be wondering why there are terraces at Mammoth Hot Springs, because it's well outside the area of the caldera and where most of the source of heat and water is coming from. Well, I'll go into that in another one of our stories and another one of our podcasts. I won't bore you with that now. It doesn't really matter which way you go around the loop, except, guys, please take a moment before you visit Yellowstone to see which roads are closed. There are always roads closed somewhere in the park. This area, and for those of you who are listening and not watching, this area on the left or the west was subject to road closures and long delays for about, I think it was 4 years. And then on the right-hand side or the east side in 2020 and 2021, the road over Dunraven Pass was closed. Now this does become a major issue because it's not as easy to get around Yellowstone. So check which roads are closed. I'm going to do this now in a clockwise direction. From Mammoth, I'm going to take the road to Tower Roosevelt. As you might expect, there's not a lot in the way of thermal features along the road. We pass the turnoff, not the turnoff, but we pass a little parking lot where Undine Falls is. And that's right at the road, so you'll want to see that. Apart from that, as I've said, not a lot of thermal features. There's a petrified tree just before you get to Tower Roosevelt, and the Park Service has very kindly put some metal bars and fencing around the petrified tree so it can't escape anywhere, and it'll still be there when you come and visit. We then get to Tower Roosevelt. Turn there to go towards the northeast entrance, and you really do want to do this part of Yellowstone. The main feature, the main location here is the Lamar Valley, which is home to so much of Yellowstone's wildlife, and it's possibly the best place in the entire world to see wolves. You would preferably want to be there at dawn or at dusk, because those are the best time to see wolves, but you've also got a chance of seeing black bears and grizzly bears as well as other wildlife as well. If we look at the northeast entrance, and I go into this in another podcast, the road to the east of the northeast entrance leads to some of the most stunning roads in the entire country. So look out for that podcast. We come back to Tower Roosevelt and we head south over what's called Dunraven Pass, which is the road between Tower Roosevelt and Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. That road, as I mentioned, was closed in 2020 and 2021, which is really a shame for the keen bear watchers. You can spend a lot of time on this road as well. The section of road to the north of Tower Fall, there is about a 2-mile section, which we always say on our tours, sorry to be like a stuck record, but on YellowstoneTours.net is where you can see our tours again. That 2-mile section is where we generally see so many bears if we're there at the right time of the day. Now, the Park Service knows this as well, so they'll often have road restrictions there. They'll often have rangers there telling you not to stop. Obviously, respect their instructions, but you can spend a lot of time on this road. When you get up to Mount Washburn, there's little hikes you can take up the Chittenden Road, and from a parking lot right at the top towards Mount Washburn. You've got a chance of seeing bighorn sheep there. As you drop down the road on the other side, as you come down to the south, you'll have spectacular views to the right or the east. Oh, I forgot. Just as you're climbing up Mount Washburn from the north side, if you look off to the right or to the east, that's another place which is great grizzly bear terrain. One of the reasons is the type of pine trees that produce or used to produce a certain type of berry, and I go into that in a lot more detail in others of our podcasts. But you'll want to stop there, admire the views, and also see if you can't see a grizzly bear down in the valley below. We'll continue over that. We get to Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, which you may or may not have done yesterday. We come across to the Norris Geyser Basin. Norris Geyser Basin actually consists of 2 separate geyser basins. You have got Back Basin and you've got Porcelain Basin. Porcelain Basin has a boardwalk trail that is a lot shorter than Back Basin. Please do at least the first portion of Porcelain Basin until you get to what's called the bacteria mats, these very colorful mats which you'll see running off the hot springs. And then we come to Back Basin. Back Basin is not only home to the world's currently highest active geyser called Steamboat Geyser, but it also has a relatively long and delightful trail system that runs around Back Basin. And depending on how much you like to stop and admire the views and the various thermal features, you could easily spend 2 to 4 hours at Back Basin alone. Now, in case you're wondering, steamboat geysers' eruption times are not predicted. I talk about this in another Yellowstone podcast. The chance of seeing it has increased dramatically in recent years, but you still have to be lucky. Let's now head north. Once again, not an awful lot to see on this next stretch of road if you are in Yellowstone to see thermal features, but it's still beautiful. You can stop at Roaring Mountain, another one of those areas I go into in more detail in another one of our Yellowstone podcasts. It is so called because of the number of fumaroles that used to roar a lot louder than they do at the moment. You then get to Obsidian Cliff. You're not allowed to climb over Obsidian Cliff because people were chipping off bits of obsidian and stealing it. And by the way, guys, you're not allowed to take anything out of a national park. Please respect that. Just after Obsidian Cliff, literally just after it, on the other side of the road, on the left or the west side of the road, is the first roadside exhibit in the entire national park system. So that has quite a bit of historical significance. We continue north, and as you get to the northwest section before you start dropping down towards Mammoth Hot Springs again, you can have some spectacular views of the various mountains. You can see them listed. Those of you who are looking at the map, those are part of the Gallatin range of mountains. The views are spectacular. You've got Swan Lake in the foreground. It makes for really wonderful pictures. If you're into hiking, longer hikes, there are some great hikes to be had up there. Then we're approaching Mammoth Hot Springs. We're going to be dropping down from a higher elevation, and I'm looking at the close-in section. Again, as you drop down towards Mammoth Hot Springs, just as you start dropping down, you'll see a couple of pullouts to the right. Stop at the first one. Take a look. You may miss this. There's a beautiful little waterfall there. And then just after it, you will see another pullout, which has also a lot of historic significance. And I talk about that in depth in another one of these Yellowstone podcasts. But pull out there, read the board, and it tells you about a wonderful engineering feat that in the old days that people used to actually stop and take pictures of the engineering in much the same way as they would stop and take pictures at Old Faithful. Then you'll see some rock formations, and then it opens up just a little bit, not all that much, but on the left-hand side or the west side is another area in the forest where on our tours we occasionally see bears. You then come to the upper terraces and the lower terraces, which I have mentioned before. So the question is, how much time do we spend on that section? Well, perhaps a day may be sufficient if you are going to not do the Lamar Valley in any depth, but maybe a day and a half or 2 days would also be more suited. One area I didn't touch on, if we come to the lower loop, is the stretch of road between West Thumb, which is right at the bottom of the lower loop, and the south entrance. Once again, not that many thermal features really close to the road, but you do have an overview off in the distance of Shoshone Lake, which is the largest lake in the country, which is not accessible by road. You then come to Lewis Lake, Lewis Falls, Lewis Canyon, all of them worth spending a bit of time at. And then down at the bottom, really close to the road, is Moose Falls. And guys, go to our virtualyellowstonetours.com site or go to our YouTube channel and take a look at that Moose Falls video. So many people drive straight past it without stopping. And it's literally only about a 5-minute walk off the road. So now that I've gone through the entire park in, well, not very much detail, but hopefully giving you an idea of what there is to see and do, let's consider the overall question again. How much time should I spend at Yellowstone? Yes, you can spend a day on the lower loop, you can spend a day on the upper loop. We, in our tours at YellowstoneTours.net, actually offer what we call a Grand Loop tour, where we do the outside of what's called the Grand Loop Road in one day. So it is possible, it's a long day, and you're really only touching the surface. Get in a little more detail if you spend one day on the lower loop, one day on the upper loop. But depending on where you're staying in Yellowstone, and depending on whether you want to take these roads off to the east entrance and then from the northeast entrance outside the park, maybe consider spending 2 days in the lower loop area. Consider spending 1.5 to 2 days in the upper loop area. So if you're able to, 3 or 4 days will give you an understanding, just a general understanding of so much of what Yellowstone has to offer. I was on one of the Yellowstone Facebook groups earlier today, and I'm recording this on March the 1st, and there were so many people wishing Yellowstone a happy 149th birthday. And I was reading some of the posts, and one guy said he's coming back for his 34th time. And that's what Yellowstone does to you. You come here, you check it out, you spend a short time here, and you realize there's so much more to do and so much more to see. Guys, if you need any more information, feel free to text me at 406-219-8885. That's 406-219-8885. You can email me at info@yellowstonetours.net. I and the rest of our company are happy to provide advice at no charge. You can see our virtual Yellowstone tours at virtualyellowstonetours.com, which is a useful resource. Click on any of the video links that you see there, and that'll take you directly to YouTube. You can then see our YouTube channel, and you can actually explore the entire park. We have videos of the entire park, every single road in Yellowstone. So you can see in advance what you can do before you get here. If you need Yellowstone lodging, please go to our site, westyellowstonelodge.com. That's westyellowstonelodge.com. And if you're interested in taking a shorter hike, we offer hikes of in between 2 hours and a day, which you can see at yellowstonedayhikes.com. That's yellowstonedayhikes.com. And all of our podcasts can be seen at yellowstonepodcasts.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you make it to Yellowstone someday.